Ladies and gentlemen, the United States Army Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps.
We hope you enjoy what we're playing. We are, again, members of the United States Army Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps. My name is Staff Sergeant Jeff Brooks, and this is Staff Sergeant Andrew Owen. We're here today playing some field music for you that you would hear back in the time of George Washington and the Continental Army. As you can see, we're dressed in a 1784 version, actually, of what the Continental Army would have worn. And you'll notice that we're wearing red coats instead of the traditional blue. And the reason for that is musicians during George Washington's time, they wore the reverse colors of their parent infantry unit. So the infantrymen and George Washington's Continental Army wore blue coats trimmed in red. Therefore, the musicians wear red coats trimmed in blue. And that was to help on the battlefield. On the battlefield, you got to think in the chaos and the scramble of a battle, the chaos of battle. It would be very difficult to identify the troops, but if the musicians wore the opposite colors, the officers could easily identify the musicians on the battlefield. And the musicians would then relay commands to the troops. Obviously, there were no radios or cell phones, so loud instruments like fifes and drums would have been used to relay different commands to the different troops across the battlefield. So that's really the purpose of musicians in the Army during that time, and that's why the instruments we play are so loud, because they needed to be heard over battle. Particularly the fife, which carries a lot further than the drum does. The drum was used primarily to kind of keep troops in step for troop movements, but the fife, it really cuts for miles sometimes. So that's why we are dressed like this, and that's why we play the instruments that we do.
Well, that was fantastic. Thank you, gentlemen, and I want to welcome everyone today to our final Why America of the season. My name is Jeannie Allen. I am the founder and CEO of the Center for Education Reform. I'm so excited to see you. And I don't know about you, but I was applauding behind my video there. I think it's absolutely fascinating. Not only was that fantastic footage, we were going to have the real ones for you, but they actually got drafted into playing music when they were laying the wreaths at the military cemetery. So we gave you the video instead, and we brought back the sergeants from a former program. And besides just applauding, what a great story. I wonder how many of our students actually know that as wonderful as music is for music's sake, the point was actually to be they were part of the military, which is why we have so many military bands. They played an enormous role. And so that's part of why we're here today. Why America Revolutionary Christmas is the start of our final program for 2020 because it shows a very critical human side to a really important battle around Christmas time, around the holidays, way back when in 1776. Most of us are very familiar, of course, with the iconic painting, Washington crossing the Delaware. But how many really know the real story about that miracle on the Delaware on December 25th, 1776? So today we'll be joined by someone who was there and who can tell us the tale, General George Washington. And to kick us off and to lead us for the majority of this session, let me introduce our Master of Ceremonies, Lawrence Dayton. Lawrence is a dear friend of the Center for Education Reform. He is the head of the History Department of Washington Latin Public Charter School and has been with us for the entire 3 seasons of Why America. He'll be introducing you to other members of the Continental Army as well as talking with George Washington. I want to thank him publicly to all of you, as well as while I have you all, thank again the sponsor and the patron of this program with whom we could not be doing this, Diana Davis Spencer of the Diana Davis Spencer Foundation. She feels very strongly that all educators and students should have an interesting and exciting historical perspective from many, many places. And so we're here because of her, and we're so grateful that Lauren Staton, you can take over the reins and lead us on the rest of our program.
So first of all, I would like to extend a warm welcome to everyone watching today. It's so good to have so many people here from all over the country and around the world as we talk about a revolutionary Christmas. I'm actually a sixth grade American civics teacher in Washington, D.C. And one of the true joys of, my profession of being a history teacher is I get to tell stories. And one of the most fascinating stories ever told in the American Revolution is the story of quite literally the Christmas miracle at Trenton. So today it's my honor to share a little bit of that story with you and to talk with you about some of the individuals who were there and actually contributed to the battle and into the Continental Army. So allow me to begin first by introducing and spending some time with the one true indispensable man of the American Revolution. So if you'd be kind of to join me in welcoming the Commander-in-Chief of the United States of America and the Continental Army, His Excellency General Washington.
Mr. Staton, how are you this day, sir?
I'm well, Your Excellency. Thank you for spending a few moments of your precious time with us. I really appreciate it. I'm sure all the people in the audience have time. Appreciate you spending part of your day with us as well. So let me begin very quickly asking you about the Battle of Trenton here. The crossing of the Delaware River, one of the most iconic paintings in all of American history. Doing it on Christmas night was a bold maneuver. Some might even argue a reckless maneuver. And why did you make that decision?
Well, as perhaps you know, sir, the show, the play was pretty well up by the middle of December 1776, and the cause of the desire, our ardent desire, initially the spirit of 1775 as well as the spirit of early 1776 had down to perhaps what you might call or refer to as its last glowing ember, what was once a blaze of when it came to passion for the cause and the deep desire for independency. It had pretty well run its course by the end of the year 1776. And so what you described as this operation, this crossing, was an act of desperation, born of desperation. Its parents really were desperation and hope. And so there had to be, from my perspective, my opinion, there had to be a bold stroke, an operation that would reignite the cause for our independency and to inspire and to, when it came to enlistments, when it came to supplies, we were in dire straits and in need of really a miracle. And again, this operation of born of desperation as it was, I knew that, and I know that we were putting all to the risk for the sake of reigniting the cause for independence, the cause for our independency. And so many of the members of my military family, those of my commanders who had initially heard the idea, were shaking their heads. They certainly had their doubts, for we all were, if this operation were to be executed, we were putting all to the risk. But again, the times were so desperate. And may I add, Mr. Staton, that what you all in your time might refer to as the spirit of 76 And that year, of course, receiving so much in the way of positive attention, many were quite happy to see it go. As we entered 1777, poised on the precipice of entering a new year, most of us were very happy to see 1776 fade away. And so this operation against the Hessians at Trenton, I know on the face of it, it appeared as if it just was not going to work, that it was an impossibility. But I was determined to see it through, to execute it, and even to put my life on the line, to give my life, to die trying. Victory or death was the password. Perhaps you know that. And so if that answers the question, the interrogative you put to me, parents were desperation and hope, this operation. Its parents were desperation and hope.
Thank you for sharing that. You mentioned that 1776 was a challenging year for you and for the Continental Army. Why was it so important that you pull off this win at Trenton? What did it mean for the Continental Army and the Revolution after this difficult year?
Well, Mr. Staten, the show would have been pretty well up had I done nothing or had this operation failed. This operation, the crossing of the River Delaware and the move toward Trenton and executing the action to take Trenton and to take as many prisoners as possible and to capture as many supplies, there was but no doubt, based on that which had transpired during the months preceding December of 1776, a long train of losses. And I'm sure that there are a number of individuals, you included, Mr. Staten, who are quite aware that the number of victories I achieved, that number was lower than the number, when it came to my losses, the number of losses were greater than the number of victories. And so my one-loss record, as you might put it, was not much about which to boast if I were one who cared to or was disposed to boast. And we needed something in the way of victory in order to inspire, to steel, to edify, to bolster the courage, to bolster enlistments, and to regain something of the initiative with respect and in regard to that spirit that was demonstrated in 1775 and early 1776. But from the time I left Boston, Cambridge in 1776, March, April, early April, to travel to New York in order to oversee its defenses. And then, of course, the disasters that befell us during the battle for New York, as it's been called. And then the retreat up Manhattan and the mauling that my army did take at White Plains. The losses at Fort Washington and Fort Lee, and of course the retreat through New Jersey until finally in early December of 1776, having crossed the Delaware and consolidated what was left of my force. Initially, I had approximately 19,000 troops in July, August, during the months of July, August, 1776. And by the early part of December of that year, my army was reduced to less than 5,000 effectives. So many had been taken prisoner, killed, or had deserted by that time. And of course, the British were offering quite the generous terms to the people of New Jersey in particular. So we did not receive much in the way of aid and assistance from the people of New Jersey, from the citizenry of New Jersey, many taking loyalty oaths, demonstrating their loyalty to the King of Great Britain, refusal to help us, our army, And so much of New Jersey for a period of time was, we considered it to be, as it in fact was, hostile territory. And so, and there were many individuals who refused to give or to sell much needed supplies and food to our army, and even refusals to harbor our troops in order to, so that they may be rendered, so that they would be rendered medical attention. And so that is where things stood in early December of 1776. So I determined upon a plan that would, as you might say, turn things around. And so that desperation, that desire to succeed, and everything was at stake. Everything from honor to our very lives, and everything in between. And so the operation was effected against Trenton.
That's excellent to hear. Let's talk a little bit more about that, actually. 1776, not a good year. I mean, 9 weeks after the Declaration of Independence is signed, New York is lost to the British. Your army is in full retreat across New Jersey, trying to escape. Let's talk a little bit more about that. At Trenton, we see you actually do something a little bit different. For the first time, we see you not engage the British directly head on. We see you almost change tactics in the war. So what prompted that? Why not attack the British head on? Why do this sneak attack on Christmas?
Well, Mr. Stajan, you perhaps know that my relative youth, ranging from my relative youth up to the beginning of the war for our independency, I oftentimes demonstrated quite the aggressive instinct. And my instinct, and it, again, that which it formed my character and my ideals and conceptions of honor, and what it meant to be an honorable person, an honorable gentleman. Those informed and fed my aggressive nature. And so in my desire to take an opposing force head on was tempered after the first year of the war. You recounted what had occurred just a number of weeks, several weeks after the signing of the Declaration, or the presentation of the Declaration of Independence. And so I finally began, you might say, to learn my lessons with respect to being so aggressive, and that there were other methods by which, or through which, I could channel my more aggressive instincts. And of course, I must thank as well, be expressive of gratitude to my military family, my commanders, because when we met in groups to discuss impending action, councils of war is the term, the expression. I at times was overruled. And I am thankful for that. I was retrospectively, I still remain so, when it comes to them tempering or attenuating my aggressivity. And so it was decided that partisan warfare, and also some of the lessons I had learned in my relative youth during the war against the French and their Indian allies. And so fighting certain methods employed that can be characterized as non-traditional tended to work very well. And even though those non-traditional methods would elicit from the enemy, from my adversaries during the War for Independence, questioning my character and whether or not I was truly a gentleman, well, the criticism coming from the opposition did not really adversely affect my disposition, and did not keep me up at night, because those methods did tend to work, and it spared us much greater losses, and it bled the British by inches. And that was also demonstrated when they attempted to set up a string of posts down through from northern New Jersey to southern New Jersey and the Jerseys. Their chain of outposts after the Continental Army's retreat in late 1776 extended for 80 miles. And so not a day went by that we did not engage in harassing operations, and that there was hardly a day as well that went by without a skirmish in November, December, prior to Christmas, 1776. And so we found that so much in the way of partisan warfare was beginning to work well for us. And so that did inform my thinking from the third week of December moving forward. And so what you see at Trenton was some of that, what proved to be beneficial fallout of that thinking, or of that state of mind with respect to converting from what was more traditional to non-traditional. It really did begin to work for us, and for that I'm so grateful.
Thank you so much for your time, General Washington. We will come back and talk to you a little bit more about some of the experiences you had at the Battle of Trenton, but we're also going to talk a little bit about your experiences at a subsequent battle, the Battle of Brandywine. I'm not entirely sure if you want to talk about that right now, so I'll give you a few moments to compose your thoughts. But just for the record, just so you're aware, I don't know if this will mean anything to you, but Yorktown, just keep that in mind. So I'm going to ask our second guest for today, Private Edward Ned Hector, to join our conversation. Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for joining us today. Private Hector, are you there?
Good day, sir. A pleasure to see you. I hope all is well with you.
Likewise, I'm glad to be able to have a little bit of time with you. Thank you so much for joining us. Could you just begin by telling us a little about yourself, like where you were born and where do you live now?
Oh, well, I was born approximately 1744. I'm a free man. I'm happy to tell you that. And I'm one of many people of color fighting for the independence of America from England. As a Black person, you could be part of the military in at least 4 different ways. I mean, you could be a free man like myself. You could be a runaway slave hoping to gain your freedom for fighting. You also could be a substitute sent in place of your master or his son, or you could have come from outside the country. There was a unit from Haiti that came in with the French. They fought in the Battle of Savannah. I was a Teamster, and I served as a bombardier with the artillery.
Well, thank you for your service, sir. I really appreciate hearing a little bit more about that. Talk a little bit more about your experience in the Army. What are Teamsters and bombardiers, and what was your role in the Army?
Okay, my role in the Army. First, I was with Colonel Proctor's 3rd Pennsylvania Artillery under the command of Captain Hercule Courtenay. You can find me on the muster roll, I believe the one that was dated March the 10th, 1777. I hauled ammunition all the way up until 1780. You don't know what a Teamster or a bombardier is? Oh, that's rather extraordinary. My good man. Well, I guess you can't know everything now, can you? Well, sir, if I may have the honor.
Please, by all means, the floor is yours.
Thank you. As a Teamster, I drive a wagon and a team of horses because I drive a team of animals like horses, mules, oxen, things like that. I'm called a Teamster. My job is to transport goods Right now, I'm transporting in my wagon ammunition, gunpowder for the artillery. In fact, behind my wagon, I'm pulling one of the cannons. As a bombardier with the artillery, I help to fire these. I help to fire cannons. It takes about 7 people to fire one cannon. I man one of the 3 rear positions of the cannon. I get the cannon onto the battlefield, help to dig it into position. I fill up the ammunition box in the back, and then I fall into, as I said, one of the 3 rear positions and aid in the firing of that. It takes approximately 7 people to fire a cannon. So we work together, and it's quite an extraordinary thing if you've never seen it in action.
So let me ask you a personal question, if I may, because I'm sure this is probably relevant to a lot of people out there. As a free Black man, as a free African American, people in our modern times might not be aware that men of color served in both the British Army and the Continental Army. So you served the Patriot cause under General Washington. Why did you make that choice to throw in with the Patriots?
Well, there's many reasons why people like myself would have gone into the military. As I told you, we vary in the military. Those who are free, we would have one reason, maybe to have freedoms that we feel that we've been that we've had taken away from us by being under the rule of Britain. A runaway slave may be trying to get away from his master and hide out in the army, and that's not a bad opportunity to be in the army because you're paid, you're fed, and there's a old tradition that goes back to the Greek and Roman times that if a slave fights for its country, that slave is often given its freedom. So a lot of them are fighting for hopefully their freedom by the end of this war. Of course, you know, you've got groups coming in, like I said, from outside the country with the French, from Haiti, actually. And it ends up that it helps to train them for their attempts to become a free nation later on themselves. So it does vary. As a substitute, if you had $300, you could buy yourself out of service. But, you know, who has $300 at hand? So often they might send one of their slaves as a substitute for them with maybe the promise to be given their freedom if they survived. Let's say maybe they might have survived. And so they come back home. Master, I'm ready for my freedom. Your freedom? Yes, you promised me my freedom. Oh, I see. But did I tell you when I was going to give you that freedom? Well, so some of them honored it, some of them didn't. So it was a very chancy thing even with them. In my case, as a Teamster, I was very valuable to the Army because there weren't many Teamsters around, especially those that had a horse and wagon. I own my own horse and wagon. In fact, the ones I'm driving right now, that belongs to me. It's my personal property. If you were a slave, obviously it wouldn't be your property. And it's funny. They sent people out to press people into service because they needed the Teamsters so badly. And, you know, they look at you and they look at your wagon, they look at your horses and they say, And, you know, it gets pretty easy to figure out where things are going to go from there. So I probably, one of my best recourse was to go in, instead of letting them take my wagon, my horses away from me, go in with it, because then I stood a chance of maybe coming out with my property. Horses and wagons are not cheap. I mean, you know, not everybody has a horse and wagon. You know, some towns don't have horse and, you know, sometimes some towns were so small that they had to get together to buy one horse and wagon. You ever heard the saying a one horse town? Well,
Yeah.
they would share it. So, you know, to have a wagon, and I had 4 horses, you know, I figured it probably would be one of the best chances. And besides, the British are coming through the countryside. They're taking everything that's not nailed down. I mean, some of my neighbors were victims of these thieving lobsterbacks. So, you know, there's a bit of an axe to grind here. So I came in, I served. By the way, there's 2 types of teamsters. There is an artillery teamster and there's the baggage teamster. The baggage teamster is carrying more supplies, food, things like that. And by the time they get done, they still have to go into the military and do service. I am an artillery teamster. That means I'm out on the battlefield. I'm part of the fight. And as such, you know, this is counted as part of my service towards our country.
Let me ask you briefly, could you talk a little bit about the battle you served in? I believe it was Brandywine and at Chad's Ford. Could you talk a little bit about that and why your service was so important in that engagement?
Oh, I think you do me too much honor, sir. But let me think. Well, really, how could I ever forget it? I remember our spies had learned information that the Redcoats had landed at a place called the Head of Elk down in Maryland, and that they were marching northward up the pike that goes to Baltimore, which is also the road to go to Philadelphia. Eventually, it becomes quite obvious where they're heading towards. They're heading towards Philadelphia, our nation's capital. I'm sure they think if they can capture Philadelphia, capture the Continental Congress, execute them for being traitors, they could put an end to this little rebellion of ours. To prevent this from happening, General Washington was sent 20 miles west of Philadelphia to the Brandywine River. And his plan was quite simple. Every place that you could take and cross that river by way of foot, he placed armies. So, sounds like a good plan? Well, maybe. I mean, it would keep them from getting across because they've got to cross the river, not us. And it's easy, you know. Do you know what happens to gunpowder when it gets wet, my friend?
It does not fire effectively.
Absolutely what? Yes. It becomes utterly useless. So if you're going to cross the river with your gun and your gunpowder, you're going to have to hold them up high. And some of the areas, there's no bridges across the Brandywine. There are fords, which means that you could wade across. And some of the wading points comes up to your waist or even higher. So again, walking across a river with your gun held up high, do you think you make a good target like that?
Yeah.
So it was a good natural barrier. But there was problems with the plans. There was at least 2 major problems with the plan. As I told you, the British are marching up from the Head of Elk, and they're getting ready to try to cross the Brandywine River at a place called Chad's Ford. Now, knowing that they're kind of heading that general direction, General Washington, the night before, sends us to Chad's Ford to set up our defenses. Proctor's artillery was supposed to set up a cannon readout fortification up next to Mr. Chad's house overlooking the river. That night, what colony do you come from, my friend?
I was actually born in Maryland, just outside of Baltimore, actually.
Oh, my friend, let me tell you about Pennsylvania. I don't know how the weather is there where you're at, but in Pennsylvania, sometimes when it rains, it just seems like the skies open up and drops. I mean, it just comes down. It comes down. Tonight is one of those nights. It's pouring rain. The road has become mired with mud, thick. It's hard to pull our wagons through, the cannons, the horses. But nonetheless, we do get through. We get to Mr. Chad's house. We haul our cannons up the hill. We dig them into position and we get ready for the battle next day. We work all through the night. We go to bed without anything to eat. The next day, The next day is really hot. It's up in the 90s. I remember that there was a little fog that had settled across the river that morning. We get up, we start patrolling and looking for the enemy. One of the things that we didn't know is that as the British were marching towards the Chadds Ford area, they come to a small town called Kenneth. And there they do something we don't expect. They split their forces into two. Half of them are sent to the Chadds Ford area with the orders to amuse the Americans. The other half are sent quietly northward behind the lines. Throughout the day, General Washington is getting reports. There's a large body of troops moving behind the lines across the river. And then he gets another report, and no, they're not. And then it goes on, back and forth like that all through the day. He's not sure what to believe. Finally, a man comes running down from the north. He wants to talk to General Washington. He tells him that the Redcoats have actually marched up and over and around a northern position. See, they knew something we did not. They knew that if you go up the river about 5 or 6 miles, after the river diverges, there are 2 other places the river can be crossed. We had no idea that those 2 existed. They came up and over and around our right side. You know what his reaction to that man was? He had that man locked up, put into custody. That seemed like an odd reaction to somebody that is trying to help you. It might be, but he really didn't know who this man was. Eventually, one of his own soldiers comes down and he gives him a report. Yes, sir, indeed. They're about half of the Redcoats are right up north of us, cannons and all, and they're pressing down on us. He changes his defense. He sends troops up northward to try to defend against them and try to hold them back. Now, on our hill, as the day goes on, not only do we hear the sound of fighting going on in front of us, but guess where we start to hear the sound of fighting coming from?
Behind you? Behind you, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, think about it, my friend. If you're in the military, if you're an army, if you have fighting in front of you and you have fighting behind you, what's getting ready to happen to you?
You're going to be enclosed and surrounded. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Does an army ever want to be surrounded by the enemy?
No, you don't ever want to be surrounded.
So you understand, we're not real happy about the situation. Now, up on that hill that we're at, about 30 yards back from our position, there's an orchard up on Mr. Chad's hill. Some of the Redcoats did manage to make it across the river, about 200 yards south of our position. They circled down below our hill and around to the back of it. Now, make no mistake, we chose this hill deliberately. It had a great command of the battlefield, but you can't see what's going on down at the bottom of the hill. You ever been on a hill like that where you could see out, but you can't see what's going on down at the bottom of it?
Right.
Well, that's what happened with us. They came up and they came around to the back of our hill. Imagine our surprise when out of that orchard out come the Redcoats. Bayonets locked, advancing on our position. 30 yards. 30 yards isn't far enough that we could take and get our cannon turned around to take and defend ourselves. So the order was given. Abandon your horses, abandon your wagons, retreat down towards Chester, regroup, get ready for a counterattack. What? Abandon my horse and wagon? Abandon my cannons? Ha! How can I do this? After all, good sir, as I told you, I am a teamster, and I'm proud to tell you that I am a bombardier. I'm supposed to retreat down to Chester. I said, never, never shall they have my team. I will save my horses and myself. And so instead of going down towards Chester, I turned around and went the other direction into the face of the British charge. Have you ever had a day that felt like the very hand of God was with you? Today is one of those days for me because some way I made it past the British. I made it back to the back of the hill where my wagon was. I grabbed what guns I could. I heaved them up into the wagon. I grabbed my horse and wagon and led them off the battlefield.
Thank you, Private Hector. I really appreciate that insight. I'd like to bring back General Washington, as he also is at this battle. So General Washington, there was a question in the chat that was asked. I'd like to pose to you very quickly. You were receiving all of these reports. What communication were you having with both John Adams and Benjamin Franklin regarding support around this time?
Certainly. The Congress at this time was still, of course, the concern as the opposition, members of the opposition, the British and Hessians, closed on Philadelphia. But at this point in time, Dr. Franklin and Mr. Adams were quite supportive. And it was just a matter of, as far as their desire was to support us in every way that was feasible or proved feasible or was possible. But what I described earlier with respect to supply and enlistment, Congress was doing very little, though it had been trying as a body to accomplish quite a bit when it came to the money. Their money was in short supply, so there's this something of a chasm between what Congress wished to do and that which they could accomplish in reality or actuality. So I felt that the civilian authority at this time was quite supportive. Communication was carried off well enough. But with respect to that first part of your interrogative, if I understand you correctly, as far as communication on the field of battle during Brandywine, I received several reports during the course of the day that there was a contingent of British. You had Cornwallis and Howe on the move. And I did not know whether or not that I should take that intelligence, that information, regarded as being credible. Taking it with a seriousness, well, it ended up deserving. But finally, we were able to move General Stark and then, of course, General Greene into position. And I must say that once Howe and Cornwallis had crossed the Brandywine, there was an action over several hours. And I believe things came off tolerably well at the end of the day, but the dispatches that I was receiving, some were credible, some I did not find to be credible, but ultimately they were to be believed. The evidence was on our side of the Brandywine. And of course, one of the lessons that I carried away from the Brandywine, it's something that you perhaps know that I should have learned after New York and the Battle of Brooklyn, Long Island. When it came to covering one's flanks, making sure that the flank was covered, you look at New York, you look at White Plains, and you look at the Brandywine, and during all three of those actions in the New York campaign, leaving one of my flanks open, exposing it to enemy action, I will own a great mistake on my part. And of course, as the war progressed, I always took intelligence information when it came to spies, cultivating relationships with individuals who could be of help, aid, and assistance. I made it a particular goal of mine to develop a network of effective spies, which I must say I think we did quite well in that regard as the war progressed. but I hope I've answered your interrogative in a most satisfactory manner, sir.
Actually, I'm glad you mentioned spies because this question came from the chat about the Battle of Trenton.
Yes.
Spies found out about the attack that was impending at Trenton. You know, Colonel Von Donop and Colonel Rahl were aware that this attack was coming. You even were forced to change your sign, your counter signs. In hindsight, do you believe that the future of the war hinged on that battle? And how were you able to pull off this attack, knowing that potentially this had been leaked to the British and to the Hessians?
Well, as I stated earlier, it all came down to really as I came to see it, as the month of December came and find myself in the middle of December of 1776 and coming to the conclusion that this was in fact it, what can be called or referred to as an all or nothing measure, all for the cause, for the cause was about to be extinguished. Morale was so low at its lowest ebb, and I found myself as one in the position of essentially begging, imploring, cajoling individuals to remain and serve beyond their term of enlistments. A number of individuals, a number of those who remained as part of the Continental Army, they understandably desired to be done with this whole enterprise and to go home. They had families, they had a land and homes to tend. They were receiving increasingly as correspondence from home, word from home, that things were not going well on the home front, and so that desire to return to one's home, I profoundly understood that. So asking them to stay on to make great sacrifice, and then initially not receiving much of the desired response, until finally a few of the men, a few lads, stepped forward. And of course, as you may know, Mr. Staten, once someone does go first, others see that. It's just, it came down to initially, I believe, most of my troops not being the one to take that step forward and volunteer for extended service. That would, of course, put their lives to the risk. At that time, they were alive. They might not have been well clothed. They were ill-clad. Many of them were sick. They were fatigued, and their mentality was such they just desired to go home. But once I addressed them. I am no orator, sir. I don't believe myself to be the most eloquent man. But somehow, some way, I found the words that did convince most to stay, and so they did. Spying, and then to answer the question, complete my answer to the interrogative about spies and developing those networks. John Honeyman was one of those we used to great advantage. His story deserves to be told. He was something the British and the Hessians believed he was their partisan, their friend. But in reality, he was, in truth, he was working for the Continental Army, essentially working on behalf of the Patriot cause. And his actions before Trenton were instrumental in its success. And his story, of course, deserves to be told and to be understood. And so I believe someone may have had an interrogative about that, gentleman. But the ruse, I believe that it worked quite well. And disinformation. to convey information that was completely, that was not correct, that it was wrong, that it was designed to divert the enemy's attention, to confuse the enemy. I began to rather enjoy, you know, the intrigue and dealing with those who were spying on behalf of the Patriot cause. Had a number of those working in New York, a number of spies in New York. My designation as the chief spy master was 711, 711 was my designation. So if you ever happen upon correspondence between and among individuals mentioning 711, that is General Washington, to whom they are referring.
Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it back over to Jeannie. I think she has something she wishes to throw in here.
I want to throw in two things, Lawrence, and have you take it back for a moment. First, because of a question, and I'm listening to you, and you know, we need heroes so much in our students' lives today, and the heroic actions that you all took, particularly during very bad weather. Many of us are going through an enormous storm for the first time all year, many of us for the second and third time. I don't think a lot of students really think that way, and maybe teachers, you can give them some thoughts about how to explain what it was like to be cold all the time, to be in such difficulty. And connected to that, more important for Private Hector, this question about, were you the only African soldier in your unit? How were you treated? And so in terms of justice and fairness, but also in terms of the conditions, I don't think we could tolerate it, many of us today. And I just wanted to ask that before we start closing down.
As referring to the Africans that were in General Washington's army, let me give you an idea about what we contributed. Many people tend to believe that all Africans that lived during the time of the colonial period were either slaves or poor, or if they were in the military, they were nothing but manual laborers. About 3,000 to 5,000 people of color fought for the American cause. About 7,000 to 10,000 served the British. General Washington, sir, you would be one of the generals over one of the most integrated armies all the way up until 1948, when Harry S. Truman would finally reintegrate the army for Korea. Not only that, if you don't mind me stepping slightly out of character, not only that, General Washington also would command at least 3 majority Black regiments, one from Massachusetts, one from Rhode Island, and the group I told you that came in with Haiti. And they were playing an important part in this struggle for freedom. The ones up at Marblehead, when General Washington referred to Brooklyn Heights, when our army would be trapped up at Brooklyn Heights, it would be the sailors from Marblehead, Massachusetts, that would be part of the group that would come and rescue them under the cover of night and fog, under the very nose of the British warships anchored in that harbor that night. What people don't realize that many of these people from Marblehead are Black sailors. There'd be many Blacks who would have taken spy for General Washington. One, James Armistead Lafayette, he would learn information. Possibly some of the information that he learned about Yorktown would come from him. By the end of the war, there would be a battle called Yorktown. And at that point, they would surround the British at Yorktown. And the British, they're not stupid. They build fortifications around the outskirts of the city. They don't want us to take and get close enough to use our heavy cannons. We have to take out 2 fortifications. After trying to break their defenses, General Washington starts digging trenches and trying to get near the city. He calls in one of his best units, the Rhode Island Regiment. They're sitting with their guns unloaded, bayonets fixed, and they take the position in 10 minutes. The French take out the other ones. We bring up our heavy cannons. We commence with the bombardment of the city, which eventually leads to the surrender of the British. This is where we win the war. By the end of the war, 10 to 25% of Washington's Army would be people of color. Now, you're probably wondering why I'm bringing this up. The reason I'm bringing this up is because, as General Washington also said, he doesn't win many battles. If he fought 10 battles, maybe he won 2 or 3 of them. So you take away about 10 to 25%, a quarter of his army, take them away. What is the chances of winning now? I mean, hardly non-existent. So literally without the contribution of all these people of color, we probably wouldn't have been able to win our independence at all. Now, yes.
No, I'm sorry, Private Hector. That's something that I was never taught in my textbooks throughout my 48 years. But I apologize for cutting you off, sir, as we are getting close to time. But that is a fascinating point that I don't think many people know. Mr. Staten, you've been teaching history for how long? Are those critical numbers and facts that you were aware of?
Those are absolutely critical. I've been teaching for 12 years, and that story is not often told in American history. It's one of that people of color are the unsung heroes of the American Revolution.
Absolutely wrong.
And I think, and I'm going to ask Jeannie Allen to rejoin us, but I think one of the critical messages of today is that we were all in this together from the very beginning.
Yes.
And that everyone made critical sacrifices. And we can take from these unsung heroes and the sung heroes, no disrespect to you, General, without your leadership, we would not be the nation that we are today. And you, sir, did have slaves, and we are aware of that. And there are challenges to every human being, and we are all human. We have our human failures and frailties. And in the time that you were there, that was sadly a fact of life, that individuals owned slaves. As wrong and as horrible as that idea is, it was a fact, and put into the context back then, something that did happen. But as Private Hector has shown us today, there were also free men who chose to fight for their freedom, even being offered wonderful things by the British to not fight for what we now enjoy today. And if I could only take this and put it onto CNN and Fox and all of our other wonderful TV channels that spout out so much divisiveness, and we could all learn from these beautiful things that occurred at the birth of our nation, I think we would begin to understand a road forward. With that, Jeannie, please.
Thank you. And that's Michael Musanti, our colleague who helps lead the Why America program at CER. And that's why General and Private Ned Hector, we so passionately believe in the phrase "toward a more perfect union." And that has been the theme of our program. And you all have helped us so greatly. General Washington, you more than once this semester, if you will, to help understand Why America, help understand history a little bit better. And I'd like to just bring in Dana Van Deensy from the Cred Ed program, because we want so much to help teachers know more and learn more, or teach us more, that we have an incredible program that we've worked with to provide credit for the great work of sitting and talking and experiencing what you are. So Dana, let me go ahead and turn it over to you, and General Washington and Private Hector, please feel free to stay, and we'll be back to you in a moment.
Thank you. Yes. What a great session today. And I believe I've sent somebody wants to screen share. I just want to share some information today about how those people participating in the series can actually earn continuing education credits with Cred Ed. So Cred Ed is a global credentialer working with global teaching standards. So just really quickly, we're going to email this information out to you as well, but I wanted you to know how, as a follow-up to these great sessions, I I believe we're heading towards 12 sessions. We've got a few of these sessions already recorded and in our platform. So you can advance to the next slide. And I just want to show you that if you use the code that you're going to be sent and you'll see on your screen today, and you register at globalcreded.com, you're going to get a free 1-year membership to our platform. And that's going to basically give you on-demand professional development training, but it's also a way for you to come back to Why America and actually earn the continuing education credits. And I'll show you just really quickly what that looks like. If we go to the next slides, you can just kind of go through these. We're going to email these directions out to you with a code, very simple. You'll bypass the payment portal and be able to register for the Why America sessions and others. When you answer the reflective questions, our academic team will reply back to you and you will earn those CEUs. Go ahead and go on to the next slide. You're going to see through the registration process where you're going to put that organization code. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see when you get into the system, a couple things. There's a place for you to create your portfolio. And this is where those CEUs are going to show up when you complete the Why America program. On the next slide, you're going to see if you search for Why America, when you get into the CredEd platform, you can go back to all of the past awesome sessions that we've had, and then also the future sessions that are yet to come in 2021. So you can take down this email, but watch for messaging from CredEd and the Center for Education Reform with these details. So again, thank you for giving us an opportunity to keep this great content alive with educators across the country.
Thanks so much, Dana. And please do feel free to let us know if you have questions. So let me just ask before we all depart and get ready for the rest of our day, prepare for those holidays, what we should think about, General Washington, Dr. Staten, and Private Hector. What should we be thinking about on Christmas Day, regardless of what we celebrate? With regard to you, what do you want us to take forward and to take forward to our students as a lesson, key lesson from history?
Mr. Staten, would you like to take precedence and go first, as it were, as it was?
Wow, asking to take precedence before His Excellency and Private Hector, that's indeed an honor. I guess as an educator, I would say to the takeaway here is that America is an incredible story. It's a story that should not have happened, but through the hard work and incredible sacrifice of patriots throughout history, both in colonial times and in the present day, this story continues. And it's through that incredible sacrifice, that hard work, and taking brave risks, because that's what Trenton was, and that's what Brandywine was. In fact, that's what the whole American experiment is. It's a risk. Taking those brave risks and being brave, that's what makes America a great country and a strong country. And hopefully, as we continue into a new year, that journey and that story continues.
Private Hector, I defer to you, sir.
Yes, General. In schools, in your classes, you learn that there's American history and that there's African American history. But some people believe that these two have nothing to do with each other. When they stop and think about it, pretty much everybody I've asked said, oh no, they're not. What they don't realize is that African American history is American history. And you know what? I don't care what ethnic group you come from. I don't care what social background you are. I don't care what cultural background you are. If you are an American, you share an African American history because these people helped you to be free. And from that is born another motto, E pluribus unum, the many that become one. We need to embrace our collective history. General.
Mr. Staten and Private Hector, you have scarcely left me with anything to say. you have eloquently stated what I believe should be the message of the Christmastide. Let me just say this. I'm reminded of something Mr. Adams said in the wake of the news he received regarding the new Constitution for the United States, these United States of America. He said, and I quote, "It has been said that there is nothing new under the sun, but with this new Constitution, let us suppose that that is not quite true. That what we have here," and of course he went on and talked about how extraordinary it was and hopefully remains. And so a pluribus unum, from many, one. Let us continue to celebrate the extraordinary diversity of this country, but as well focus our efforts on the unum too. And so I am wholeheartly embracing the message of Mr. Staten and Private Hector, as I did during the war, after the war, and through my presidency and retirement from the presidency. And I think the message is one that all should take to head and heart. So I know that.
With that, thank you so very much, General Washington, Private Ned Hector, and of course our MC and master teacher, Lawrence Staten. Thank you all for joining us, teachers, students, and friends. Stay tuned for more information and certainly this recording. And we wish you all a very, very happy holiday season. Merry Christmas as well.
Thank you. You too.
Happy Christmas to you.